Hey, what's going on everybody? This is robwillis.info here, and in this video I want to talk about the basic setup and installation of VMware's vCenter 6.5, and more specifically I'm going to be talking about the VMware vCenter Server Appliance, or the VCSA as it's more commonly known. So the last two videos I've done have covered some of the more basic topics like what is VMware, vSphere, ESXi, and vCenter, along with the basic installation and configuration of vSphere ESXi onto a physical host. And this video is basically going to pick up where I left off in the last video. So if you missed the previous videos or you're just not familiar with these topics, you should definitely go back and check them out before proceeding with this one, because it's basically going to build on top of all of those things we covered there. So I'll have links to that stuff down below, and check them out whenever you get a chance if you haven't already. Alright, so moving on, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the basic idea of what I'm going to do here today is I've got the ESXi host from the last video where I installed ESXi 6.5, and then I've gone ahead and created an additional ESXi 6.5 host on my network. So I now have two ESXi 6.5 hosts on my network. And so the basic idea of how this is going to work is I download the vCenter ISO image onto my Windows 10 machine, and then from there I'll deploy it onto one of these ESXi hosts. And then after it's deployed, you can go ahead and configure it and bring ESXi hosts and start building your inventory and all of that fun stuff. So let's go get started with deploying the server appliance. Okay, so now I'm on my Windows 10 machine, and like I said, I've already gone ahead and downloaded the VCSA ISO image from VMware, and I saved it to my desktop. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that folder, and here's the ISO image here, and I'm just going to right click and mount, and Windows 10 just mounts it to a virtual CD-ROM drive, and from there I can browse the ROM, and I'm just going to go to a VCSA UI installer and pick Win32 because I'm on Windows, and then double click on the installer.exe and give the installer a second to launch here. So now that it's fully loaded, we see that we can install, upgrade, migrate, or restore from a previously saved backup. But in this case, it's going to be an entirely new vCenter environment. So I'm just going to go with the first option here and click install. And the next screen tells you that it's going to be a two-stage installation. The first stage will deploy the appliance, and the second stage will be to actually set up the appliance. So I'm just going to go ahead and click next to continue. And then after that, we see the EULA agreement. I'm just going to check I accept and click next to continue. And then on the next screen, we'll need to pick our deployment type. So we've got options to keep things simple and keep everything on one server. We can go with the default, the embedded platform services controller, or you can kind of break things out and go with the external ones. But in this case, we want to keep things as simple as possible and just go with the default and keep everything on one server. So I'm just going to go with the embedded one and go ahead and click next. And so the next screen asks for the appliance deployment target, and this is actually going to be the ESXi host that I want to deploy the vCenter server appliance to. So in this case, I'm going to go with my 192.168.2.51, the default port of 443, and I'm going to use my root login, and it's actually the password that I used or created whenever I installed ESXi, and that's it. And I'm going to go ahead and click next. And then it gives me a warning about the SSL certificate, and I'm just going to go ahead and click yes to accept that and continue and connect to that host. And then the next screen asks for some basic settings about the appliance itself, like what do we want the server appliance name to be, and then setting the root password and confirming it. Alright, so on the next screen is where we select our deployment size, and I'm just going to go with the default tiny, and I'm going to stick with the default storage size as well. But depending how many hosts and virtual machines you expect to have in your environment, you'll need to adjust that accordingly. The more hosts and virtual machines you expect to support, the more vCPUs, memory, and storage you're going to have to provide to the server appliance itself. So with this deployment being for a lab, like I said, I'm going to go with the tiniest deployment, and I'm going to go ahead and click next. And you may have noticed that the storage required for the tiniest setting is 250 gigabytes, and the largest drive or data store that I have available is only 100 gigabytes. So that's why I'm going to check this enable thin disk mode, and it's only going to take the amount of space that is required during the installation, so that way I can deploy this on a drive that is actually smaller than what it can potentially grow to. And that's going to allow me to install this at this point, even though the drive's smaller. So I'm going to make sure I check that to enable it, and then I'm going to go ahead and click next. Alright, so now to configure the default network settings, so I'm just going to attach it to the VM network, which is the vSwitch on that ESXi host. And for the system name, I'm going to do, so if you see the help, it says vCenter uses the FQDN or IP address as the system name. If you leave the optional FQDN field empty, it'll use the IP address as the system name. And that's what I want to do here. I don't want to use DNS to connect to the vCenter server. I just want to use the IP address. So I'm going to use a completely new IP address here, and I'm just going to go with 192.168.2.53 because my other ESXi hosts are 51 and 52. And I'm just going to plug in my default subnet mask and my default gateway along with my default DNS servers here, and click next to continue. And then on the last page, it asks us to review the settings that were configured and click finish to begin deploying the server appliance. So this part's going to take a minute, so I'm going to go ahead and skip a little bit to when it's completed, and we'll pick up from there. Alright, so the deployment process is just about complete, and we'll see that if we click continue, it'll just continue on directly into stage 2 of the deployment process. However, if we were to exit this installer prematurely, we can also continue on by browsing to HTTPS, the IP address we specified for the appliance, and specifying the port 5480. And so I'm just going to click continue to proceed on to stage 2. And the first page that we see is the introduction to stage 2, where we're going to set up the vCenter server appliance. And I'm just going to go ahead and click next to continue. And the next page is going to be the appliance configuration page. So this is where you would set the time synchronization mode along with any NTP servers that you want to use. And this is also where you can enable SSH access on the vCenter appliance, which is a good idea because you're probably going to end up doing this later on if you get into some more advanced configuration. It also says that you're going to need this if you're going to want to run high availability. So I'm just going to go ahead and enable that now, and click next to continue. Alright, and next up is going to be the SSO or single sign-on configuration. And I'm just going to go for my SSO domain. I'm going to go with the default there, which is vSphere.local. And you see that the username is going to be administrator. And then I'm going to type in my SSO password and confirm it. And then for the site name, I'm just going to use something basic like lab. And once I finish up with that, I'm just going to go ahead and click next to continue. And next it asks us if we want to join VMware's Customer Experience Improvement Program. I'm just going to uncheck that and click next to continue. Alright, and finally we're ready to complete, and it asks us to review the settings before we hit complete on the wizard. And everything looks good, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit finish. And it says you will not be able to pause or stop the install from completing once it's started. Click OK to continue, or click cancel to cancel now. And I'm just going to click OK to continue. And this process is going to take a few minutes to complete, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead to when it's completed, and we'll pick up from there. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes and the setup has just completed, so the appliance is now successfully set up and ready to go. And we see that it has a few links to help us get started working with the appliance, and it's got a link there. Both of these links will be accessed by specifying HTTPS, the IP address of the vSphere appliance that we just set up and configured. And then if you want to access the web client directly, you can just do /vSphere-client, and that'll take you right into the web client. Or if you want to go to the getting started page, you can just specify the IP address of the appliance itself, and that will take you directly to the getting started page, and that will have links to the web client as well as the HTML5 client. But at this point, we're all done with the installation wizard here, and we're ready to start using the appliance. So let's go ahead and close out of here and get started using the appliance. And so as I exit the installer, it actually pops up with a Firefox window with the address already pre-populated. And we see that we get a your connection is not secure because it's a self-signed certificate. So I'm just going to go ahead and click the advanced button and add the exception and confirm the exception. And we see that we get our VMware getting started page here. So as you can see, there's a few links here. There's a link to the web client, the Flash-based one, the HTML5 client that has partial functionality. Some vSphere documentation, and also a link to what functionality is supported in the HTML5 client. But if you can basically always hit this link if you're not sure how to get to the vSphere web client or whatever, but you're basically just going to hit the IP address of the appliance itself, and that's it, and it'll take you to this page, and then it has links to all of that stuff. And of course, if you were using DNS, you would just use the DNS name here, and it would take you to the same page. And so just to show you what I'm talking about real quick, let me pull up a new tab here, and I'll just type in the IP address of the vCenter Server Appliance and hit enter, and you see it takes me right to the getting started page. So you can just always use this as your reference if you need to. Alright, so let's get started with checking out some of these clients. So we'll start with the web client, or the Flash-based one, first. Now this is going to be the full-featured client that supports or has support for all of the vCenter vSphere offerings and products and add-ins and all that stuff. But you'll see that we pull it up here by accessing the vSphere-client, and it asks us to log in using the administrator account and specifying our SSO domain, which is going to be vSphere.local, and using the password that we created during the install process. And I'm just going to give this a second to load here. Alright, so here you can get the general idea of what the Flash client is going to look like, and you'll see that the instance right now is basically empty. There's nothing in the inventory, but we see all of our basic options here for managing the instance, as well as with version 6.5 we also have the addition of the update manager rolled up into the web client now as well, and you also do not need a separate VM server for that either. So let's go ahead and pull up the HTML5 client and let that load as well, and I'm just going to give that a second here, and once we have both consoles up, we'll go ahead and explore them both. Alright, so in here you can get the idea of what the HTML5 client looks like, and it looks a lot like the Flash client, but you'll see that there's some things missing, some things are a little bit different, and overall it has a little bit different look and feel to it. And generally I actually prefer the HTML5 client. I think most people do. It's a little leaner and cleaner and more responsive. And oh, you know what, there is one more console or portal that I want to mention here, and that's right, they don't actually mention this one on the getting started page. But the vSphere appliance itself actually has its own administrative page or portal, and you can access that by accessing the IP address of the server appliance and specifying port 5480. And you'll see that we get the SSL warning just like we did with the other pages because of the self-signed certificate. So I'm just going to add the exception and continue on here. But again, the address is the IP address of the server, and just specify the port 5480, and you'll see we have our Appliance Management login here. And this one's going to be root and the password that we set during the initial setup of the appliance itself. And then we go ahead and log in. So this one does not use the SSO for the login to it. This is just for the local credentials for the appliance itself. So this is where you'll go to do general maintenance to the vCenter server appliance. You can shut it down, you can reboot it, you can update it, you can make changes to the network, SSH access, all that kind of stuff. Add users to the local administration, get statistics, CPU, memory usage, database usage, all that kind of stuff. Basically everything and anything you would need to do to the vCenter server appliance itself, and not so much vCenter, you would do here. But it's important to remember that this portal actually exists, and you'll access it again by specifying HTTPS, the IP address or DNS name of the vCenter server appliance, and specifying port 5480. And like I mentioned earlier, you can actually update this thing, so make sure you log back in regularly and check for updates from the repository, and you can just go ahead and install the updates on the fly, and you'll see sometimes you'll see changes into the web UI and stuff like that. Sometimes there's security updates and other stuff like that for the appliance itself. But it is a good idea to log in here regularly and check for updates, and just check the overall health of your vCenter server appliance. And so actually, while we're on that subject, let's go ahead and log in. I'm going to log into the ESXi hypervisor that is running the vCenter server appliance, and let's take a look and see what it looks like for the appliance at the normal VM console, so you can get an idea of what that looks like. Alright, so again, I'm on the ESXi hypervisor that is running the vCenter server appliance. So we're actually going to look at it like we're going to see it from a VM perspective. So we see the server appliance here, and I'm just going to right click and open my VMware console so I can see what would be on the screen if I was actually like physically sitting in front of this. And I'm just going to launch the remote console. Alright, and so what do you know, it looks exactly like an ESXi hypervisor looks like whenever it's fully booted up, except instead of the gray and yellow, it's gray and blue. And then it also has some information about the appliance itself, along with some information and URLs and stuff on how to manage it. And then we see at the bottom we have the same F2 to customize, F12 to enter the shutdown startup options. But that's it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and close out of there. So like I said, we have our maintenance portal, which is accessed by the IP address of the server appliance and specifying that port of 5480. And then we also have the vSphere web client, which is accessed by the IP address of the server appliance / vSphere-client. And this is used for general everything with vCenter that you're going to do. And then we also have the HTML5 client, which is similar to the vSphere web client, but it can also be used for your normal day-to-day, but that's going to be accessed by the IP address of the vSphere appliance / UI. And if all else fails and you get lost, you can always just go to the IP address of the vCenter server appliance itself, and that'll take you to the getting started page. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the vSphere web client and let's get started building out our data center. We'll get some hosts added into here and get some VM set up, and I'll show you what this is all about. So I'm just going to right click and create a new data center, and for my data center name, I'm just going to name it lab. And then I'm going to click OK. And you'll see that it'll show our data center up here on the left hand menu, but you'll notice that there's no host in our data center. So let's go ahead and right click on the data center itself, and I'm going to add a host, and this is going to be an ESXi host. So I'm going to use the IP address of, this is actually going to be the ESXi host I created in the previous video. I'm just going to add that IP address in there and click next, and then I'm going to type in my username and password. And those are just the normal username and password for that ESXi host. And I'm going to click yes to accept the certificate and connect to the host. And we see that it automatically picks up the virtual machines that are already on the host. And this is actually the same host hosting the server appliance. And I'm just going to click next. And I'm just going to leave it on the evaluation license and hit next. And for lockdown mode, I'm just going to leave that as the default of disabled. And for the VM location, I'm just going to go with the default of lab. You'll see that it was already selected here. I'm just going to go ahead and click next, and then it says ready to complete, and we see it picked up everything correctly. So I'm just going to go ahead and click finish, and you'll notice that it actually shows up as disconnected right here, but then down at the task, the recent task here, you'll see that it's still working on it, and there it goes, it just completed. But so now I'm actually going to go ahead and add an additional host into the vCenter here, and I'm just going to follow the exact same steps. It's just going to be like the previous one, except this one's going to be .52 instead of 51, but it's another ESXi 6.5 host that I've already set up. And like I said, I'm just going to follow the same steps, but I'm just going to go ahead and skip through these really quickly here. Alright, so at this point we have a basic vCenter server appliance set up. We have a few hosts added into our data center. So let's go ahead and take a look around and see what we've got going on here. So you notice the menu on the left hand side. We can expand out a host and then select virtual machines that are located on that host. So say the .51 host here, we'll notice that it's got 3 virtual machines on it. So if I click on the Ubuntu one, we notice that it looks very similar to how it looked managing it on the ESXi host directly. So we've got all those same basic settings, but we've also got some additional functionality added here. But you'll notice like we got the same menu layout here. We still have our actions button, but here's where things start to get interesting. So while we still have all the regular options, power, guest OS, snapshots, console, and all that, you'll notice some additional menu items here like migrate, clone, template, fault tolerance, update manager down at the bottom. And this is all additional functionality that comes with vCenter, and you wouldn't see these items normally exposed in the ESXi manager that you would when managing a host directly. And another thing you'll notice here is that we have also got multiple ESXi hosts that we can manage through this one console here, where normally you would have to log into each host directly and manage it through its own individual console. So now we can centrally manage all of our ESXi hosts. So what does this all mean exactly? Well, now that the hypervisors are connected together by a central resource, we can now do some advanced stuff between them, like move virtual machines. So take this .51 hypervisor here and the Ubuntu 1.virtual machine. Now it's actually currently powered off, but what I'm going to do is just right click and click on migrate, and then I can actually move this machine from one hypervisor to another. And I'm just going to click on change both compute resource and storage and go ahead and click next. And then for my compute resource, I'm going to select the other hypervisor that's on the environment, the .52, and I'm going to go ahead and click next. And then it's going to ask me to select the storage that I want to move the virtual machine to on the destination hypervisor. And I'm just going to go ahead and select the 40 gig local and click next. And then lastly, it'll ask me to select the network that I want to use on the destination hypervisor. And this is going to be the network that I want to connect the virtual machine to. And I'm just going to go with the default selection there and go ahead and click next, and then click finish to begin the migration process. And that's just going to take a second to finish up there. But there are some ways where you can even do this where the virtual machine is turned on with no downtime. But of course there are some restrictions around that. But you can see that it actually already completed the migration, and we can see that our Ubuntu One machine is now moved to a completely different hypervisor. So we just moved a virtual machine from one physical host to a completely different physical host on completely different storage, but it's going to run exactly the same as it did. The hardware is allocated to it is all exactly the same. It still has the same amount of vCPUs, memory, all of that stuff. It'll still use the same IP address that it was using if a static IP address was set, and it should have access to the same network because both of these hypervisors are on the same network. But that's it. We just completely moved a virtual machine. And now say if this was a bigger hypervisor and we needed to give this virtual machine more resources, now we can. We don't have to rebuild it on a completely different host or anything like that. It's crazy. We just completely moved this thing just like that in a matter of moments. Alright, so now let's try something a little bit different. One of the other things that makes VMware vCenter so useful is the ability to clone virtual machines. So let's go ahead and power off the Ubuntu One virtual machine real quick. And then let's go ahead and take the Ubuntu 2 machine up here, and I'm just going to right click, and I'm going to go to clone, and then clone to virtual machine. And now this is going to make a complete duplicate of this virtual machine. And it asked me to enter a name for the new virtual machine, and I'm just going to do Ubuntu-3, and I'm just going to select my lab and click next. And then for the compute source, I'm going to do the .52, and then I'm going to click next. And for storage, I'm just going to select that 40 gig local and click next. And then that's it. I'm just going to go ahead and click next and finish. And then that's it. It goes and begins the cloning process. And that's all there is to it. We just completely cloned an entire virtual machine. And now it's on, and it's also on an entirely different hypervisor as well. But now we can go ahead and power it on, and it'll be an exact copy of that virtual machine. It'll have the same vCPUs, the same settings, the same memory, and the exact same hard disk. So anything that was installed on there will be installed on this one as well. So if Ubuntu was installed on it, I actually didn't install it yet. It was just an empty shell for an Ubuntu install. But if it was installed, it would just go ahead and power on and boot Ubuntu. And as long as the static IP address wasn't set, it would also pick up a IP address through DHCP. And you'd also want to make sure that the host name was changed inside the OS. But other than that, we have a completely new and additional virtual machine on the network, and that's it. And you can go ahead and you can power it on, and you can console into it, and you can do everything you would normally do with a virtual machine without having to install from scratch and configure the virtual machine and then boot the operating system and configure it and all that. Alright, and one last thing is I want to show the HTML5 client real quick now that we got some stuff populated in vCenter, but you'll see that it basically looks nearly identical to the Flash-based web client. It's a little bit cleaner overall in its design and everything, and it's a little bit snappier to respond, but overall it looks very similar. You'll notice some things aren't available, like the update manager isn't available in the HTML5 client, but your right click menus will work basically the same, your action menus and all that. You can still do your migrations, your clones, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's where I'm going to wrap this one. This is the third and final video in my VMware series that I've been working on, and I hope you guys found it informal and useful, and you know, found some stuff to take away from it, and hopefully it gets you into using VMware ESXi and vCenter. And honestly, like, the whole reason I did this is because I just love working with these products, and because it honestly makes my life easier, or it did make my life easier as a sysadmin administrator, because it was just, I didn't have to really spend my time troubleshooting the virtual machines. I could get to the issues that I really should have been looking at, and it's just they're great products to work with. And I hope it helps you guys get into it, and helps you get you running your own hypervisors at home. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.